Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's 2 o'clock. We'll get our special council meeting to deal with budget started. So I'll call the meeting to order and we need to adopt the agenda. So I have a recommendation here that the agenda for the February 27th, 2023 special meeting of council be accepted and passed. Moved by Councillor Hearn, seconded by Councillor Rankin. All those in favor? That's carried. Thank you. Any disclosure of pecuniary interest with anything on today's agenda? Councillor Rankin's none.
No.
Councillor Hearn's none, and I have none. So with that, we'll move on to our items for consideration. We only have the one today because this is a special meeting, and that is our budget presentation. So welcome, Farhad. I understand you're all geared up to give us a presentation.
Thank you, Mayor Lennox. Can everybody hear me?
Sorry?
On the online.
Oh, okay.
Perfect.
Matt's giving us the thumbs up.
Perfect. Before I begin, just a few housekeeping. Today is the first budget discussion with the council. So council is not expected to approve any budget today. Today, what staff is looking for is direction and some clarification. Last year, we had 3 budget discussion. This year, so far, we scheduled 2. One is today happening and another one on March 20th. Depending on how much things need to change, we are hoping that March 28th could be a budget approval day. March 20th. So before diving into the detail of the budget, I want to give a context and overview of what's coming in next 1 hour. We are going through an unusual economic time. Some scholars characterized period like the one we are experiencing now as a volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous period. Global pandemic, historically high inflation, rising interest rate, and increased global geopolitical conflicts created tremendous cost pressures and affordability crisis for our residents. However, we are optimistic about the future. The consensus is that the worst of the pandemic and inflation are behind us. Inflation and interest rate are expected to come down to normal level in the next 12 months as per Bank of Canada guidance. Municipal staff are committed to deliver a value for money budget that balances affordability, service expectation, and infrastructure development. Invariably, a balancing act comes with trade-offs or choices that forces us to give up or delay something to get something. Why do we have to give up something to get something? Because our resources are limited and our wants are expanding. In this budget, staff is seeking council direction on staffing, affordable tax rate, and capital project in the context of fiscal prudence. For example, in the next 1 hour, you will see the base case proposes a tax increase of 7.08%, of which 4.82% is the true tax levy increase on the existing resident and 2.26% is the organic growth. The overall 7.08% tax levy increase lead to roughly $71 per residential household, typical residential household. Amount varies based on the size and all the other different aspects of the house. This 7.08% does not include any new staffing level. On the other hand, we have an infrastructure funding gap of $102 million in the next 10 years. This $102 million gap is expected to be a little bit of lower because we get senior government conditional grants such as Connecting Link and FCM grants. 2023 capital project wish list ask is for $26 million. We have funding available for $10 million. So there is a gap. As a result, choices need to be made on the timing of some projects, such as Arthur Wastewater Treatment Plant Phase 2, Mount Forest Outdoor Pool, and Aquatic Center. So before I dive into the detail of the budget, I want to share one quote. I used this quote in my previous budget presentation, and it gives a little bit of context in terms of decision making. The quote was said by Mark Twain, and it goes like that. Get your facts first, and then you can distort them as you please. So today, what staff come up with, that's one version of the reality, the way we see it. Based on council direction, community priority, public's expectation, we can adjust and move forward. So that's the essence of that code. So now, second slide, please. So in this budget presentation, I have 4 sections. Introduction, what you just heard, and then we'll talk about the operating budget, then we'll talk about the capital budget, and we will end with a discussion on how we should be moving forward. Next slide, please. So what was the focus of the budget? The primary reason we do a budget is that to maximize public goods. But in capital budget, we allocate money and choose a specific project to build our infrastructure. And on the operating budget, we focus on delivering affordable quality services. What our dollars can buy for the services our residents expect us to deliver. The township delivers 7 different services, from general government to protection to person and property, transportation services, environmental services, health services, recreation and cultural services, and planning and development services. Both for operating budget and for the capital budget, we will discuss all the budget in the context of these 7 services. So how the process involved for this year? This is my first budget with the township. Budget template was sent out to the department on September 30th. And I met with the department heads in November, December, and in January to finalize the number and come up with a consensus. And today we are meeting with the council to discuss what staff has finalized as a draft budget. And we're hoping March 28th could be the second discussion and final budget deliberation. The outcome of the budget process is 2 main things. One is the operating tax levy, the tax levy decision, and the capital project decision. For example, last year, council approved 4.86% of tax levy increase. Out of the 4.86%, 1.48% was the growth, and 3.38% was a true levy. And in terms of overall capital project, last couple of years, our approved capital project amount was around $15 million. So what was the guideline to prepare this year budget? Considering all the context of high inflation, coming out of the pandemic, and cost of living prices and all these things, the key guideline stuff followed in delivering this budget is to same service level, business as usual service level, and documented cost pressure, and see how much it costs to deliver the same service level as last year. So that was the direction staff used in preparing this budget. Overall, some of the cost pressure stood out and inflate the overall budget amount. So what are those? Cost of living adjustment for wages and salary was 1.6%. Health benefit increases was 6.9%. Insurance was around 22%. Hydro was around 3%. And in the context of our province, our general inflation was 6.8%. But things were much worse on the capital side of things. Construction inflation was 15.6%. Some of the project which we got 2018 estimation for $1 million, now it costs $3 million. because of the material price increase, also labor shortage. So both are kind of making capital project really a challenging aspect in this current frame. So just to disclaimer, in this budget, we did not expect resurgence of COVID. So there no consideration for COVID was made on it. And it also include a real number or tax levy transfer for all the conservation authority. So if you, next slide, please. So if you see, in general, our conservation authority partners increase their levy by around 6.7% on average. So now a little bit context on growth versus reassessment. So growth versus reassessment is the context is useful because it gives us an idea what any amount increase, what is the direct impact on existing taxpayer, and what are the new addition, demolition, or a new building in our community. As I alluded at the beginning, this year we got one of the highest growth in our community, 2.26% compared to last 3 years, it hovered around 1.5%. My anticipation is that this trend will continue for 2023 as well. And this 2.26% growth is on point with the county average. So if you take all the 7 municipality, lower tier municipality, and get their average 2.26%, and we've hit that 2.26%. So we are on average on the pace with the county. In terms of assessment value, we are on the 7th year of a 4-year assessment plan. So this year we are using the same assessment base we used for last year, and so that is the 2016 assessment base. Ministry could change that as part of the provincial budget deliberation. There are an ask to change it in 2024 or 2025 based on 2023 market value. But the no decision been made at this point. These are the discussion going on at this point. So now we will dive into the operating budget. The first part of the operating budget is the general government. General government segment relates to the governance and operation of the municipality itself that cannot be directly attributed to any other specific segments. It is comprised of the council, administration, corporate services such as finance, human resources, CAO, and clerk's office. As you can see, we see a revenue increase of 154,000, but our expense grew by 302,000, leading to a net cost increase of $148,000. Revenue increase is largely driven by higher level of investment income due to a new investment and banking contract with RBC and increased OMPF contribution from the province. Cost increase is mainly driven by the increased cost of information technology, insurance, and payroll. Council segment increase is largely attributed to a new line item being added to support continued community grant and volunteer engagement, $25,000 in total. Moving to the next one, protection services. Protection is comprised of fire protection, crossing guard, conservation authority, animal control, building, and structural inspection. The fire department is responsible for providing fire suppression services, fire prevention program, training, and education. Wellington North Fire Services continue to operate out of the 2 stations in Mount Forest and Arthur. And we are also moving forward with our management partnership with Minto Fire. Training will be a large item this year as fire department works toward meeting the mandatory certification regulations set out by the Fire Marshal's office. Looking at the property standard budget is slightly reduced to accommodate for less than anticipated cost of service from the city of Guelph. Moving on to roads and transportation services. Transportation Services is responsible for the construction and maintenance of the municipality roadways, bridges, parking areas, and street lights. Road expenses are up and are largely driven by marketplace cost pressure for materials and township-wise cost pressures such as insurance. Construction material cost inflation was 15.6%. Asphalt, concrete, and other material prices are significantly higher. Moving to the next segment, which is health services and recreation and cultural services. Health services includes contribution to the operation of local cemeteries. This year, there is a special capital project coming on the cemetery side. So there is a contribution to capital on the health services as well. On the recreation and cultural service, it aims to improve the health and development of the township residents. Township operates and maintains parks, arenas, swimming pools, ball diamonds, community centers, and many recreational programs. You will see the increase in recreational services is one of the lowest among other services. These two reflect the lower level of service due to the closure of the Mount Forest pool. Moving to the next services, planning and development. Planning budget is largely reduced in anticipation of a greater application volume. The application fee paid by developers and property owners mostly cover this user pay service. There are a number of minor general planning functions that are not cost recoverable. These costs are mostly assigned to municipal staff in the department, and the budget reflects that. After planning, then moving into the development, Economic Development Office leads and participates in the activities that promotes economic growth. The office supports a variety of standalone programs as well as a number of partnership programs with Wellington County, Saugeen Connect, Minto, and joint partnership with Minto and Mapleton Township. The Economic Development Office provides a variety of community and business support services, manages township-wide programs, conducts economic planning, runs events and programs in support of and in conjunction with other partners. So now we'll look into all these services together and see what is our proposed tax levy. Adding up all these, our proposed tax levy is around $8.6 million. Which is 7.08% higher than last year. Now we will look at how this $8.7 million tax levy impact the overall property tax for a typical household. Next slide, please. Before we talk about the individual household tax implication, this $8.6 million tax levy includes three types of levy transfer. Levy transfer for capital, levy transfer to reserve, and levy transfer to reserve funds. As you see, some are driven by direct our reserve and reserve fund policy, and some are more into the way we contributed to our capital program in the past. So there is a council has discretion in directing how much more or how much less we want to transfer tax levy to capital, reserve, and reserve fund. Moving on to the next. So it shows whether we are drawing down on our reserve or we are contributing or building up our reserve. As you can see, staff is proposing a very consistent and with previous year and policy oriented reserve fund contribution. We are not drawing down our reserve on any of the service area except for admin. We kept it at the similar level as last year, drawing down $42,500 as a revenue from reserve fund for the admin services. The next tax levy transferred to reserve fund come down to 649,000. And last year it was 581,000. The difference of 67,000, it is mainly coming from the CBO transfer to reserve because we had unprecedented building permit issuance. So that's created a workload and created some surplus. So that's the only difference in terms of net taxation reserve change. Moving on to the next one, how all things considered impact the tax levy. One thing, it is easier to discuss or easier to compare any initiative or any expense if we take a look at what is the 1% tax levy look like. So our total tax levy is $8.6 million. 1% of it is $86,000. If there is a proposal for any cost, any new initiative, and it cost $86,000, then it is 1% of the tax levy. The $573,000 tax levy increase leads to an overall tax increase of 7.08%. Out of this $573,000, around $183,000 comes from growth or new assessment. The remaining $390,000 or 4.82% is the reassessment or tax on existing residents. And this figure includes a net transfer to reserve and capital program. As you can see, the contribution to the capital program is also up by 6.91%. This contribution probably needs to be ramped up in the coming days to minimize our infrastructure gap. We'll discuss the infrastructure gap in the capital budget part of the presentation. Now we will look at this $573,000 levy increase and what it means for the typical residential single family dwelling. A typical residential single family dwelling would be subject to an increase of $71 tax in property tax increase. Detail on impact on other class will be shared in the next budget presentation. To put the $71 increase in perspective, let's compare it with the overall tax bill for a typical residential single family dwelling. A typical household paid around $3,400 tax. And out of this $3,400, township portion is around $1,277. An increase of $71 take the total tax levy increase to $1,348. Next slide, please. Oh. Okay.
This one, you turn here. That'll be the slide.
Yes, yes. Yeah. So now that was the base case. 7.08% increase was the base case. There is a proposal before council for 3 additional FTE. And this 3 additional FTE will cost us around, on an annual basis, $286,000. Adding an additional $286,000 for 3 FTE to the base increase of $573,000, take the total tax levy increase to $859,000 or 10.62%. Now we will look at what this $859,000 increase means for a typical household. So on the base case, we have seen that with 7.08% increase, typical household will pay $71 extra. With the 3 FTE, that $71 get increased to $115. So $44 additional per household with the 3 FTE scenario. So now, just to wrap up the operating budget part, these $1,392 tax, this is only the part of the property tax. All the money township collects, township retain around 35 cents for every dollar. Around 50 cents goes to the county, and the remainder goes to school authority and conservation authorities. Next, we will move into the capital budget part of the presentation. So capital budget is the interesting one. And before I share the detail of all different projects, all different asks, I want to share 3 perspectives from 3 different angles on what is the state of our infrastructure, how much money expert says we need to invest to have a green and good condition infrastructure. The first assessment is provided by Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing as part of their annual financial indicator report. Second assessment comes from Township's 2021 asset management plan. And the third assessment summarizes staff's understanding of the township's infrastructure needs in the next 10 years. We will start with the financial indicator report on asset consumption ratio. The full report is in the appendix. Now we'll stay here. Yeah. Yeah. So here in this slide, there are 2 indicators. One is the debt, and another one is the closing amortization balance or asset consumption ratio. So I will focus on asset consumption ratio and what it tells us. The ratio indicates how much of the assets life expectancy has been consumed or used. It shows the relative age of the municipality's physical assets. This indicates that the Township of Wellington North asset base is older compared to other southern lower tier counties of rural majority. While Township of Wellington North's ratio is currently 54.5% against an average of 46.9%. In a normal people's term, what it means is if you buy a car and the car you expect it to last 10 years and it costs $100,000, at the 5th year you have used on a straight line basis half of your car value. So you know on 10th year you need to buy a new car, or on maybe on 5th year you go into some fleet management policy. So this is a purely financial accounting side of the equation. And we know accounting is always historical value. So it looks into our original cost of building all those assets, not really replacement cost. So then that's why we'll look into another perspective, another angle of looking at the same infrastructure. That is our asset management plan. Next slide, please. Asset management plan look into our infrastructure from a replacement value perspective, not on original cost, what we have paid in 2000 to build some roads, not those costs, but what will take it as today or in this report in 2021 to build our infrastructure. According to the 2021 asset management plan, the township needs to invest $16.5 million annually in order to service current and planned infrastructure to facilitate growth, inclusive of operations and maintenance expenditures. As depicted in the graph from 2018 through 2020, 2020, the township has made significant stride in investing in infrastructure with an average annual spend around $11.6 million on core assets. And this continued last year as well. So the council approved around $15 million worth of capital project. Staff were able to complete around $11 to $12 million capital project. So this gap between what we need and what we are doing leads a gap of $4.5 million annually. And if we just extrapolate it for 10 years, so that's around $49 million in 2021 $2021. And in the next one, we will inflate this number and use staff judgment, staff's understanding. What are the major items that need to be done? What are the routine regular maintenance that need to be done? So next slide, please. The detail of this in the appendix 1 or page 42 of your agenda package. So this third assessment summarized the staff's understanding of the township's infrastructure need in the next 10 years. Staff took the time to identify major capital projects for the next 10 years, along with regular renewal and maintenance project. We need close to $195 million in the next 10 years to deliver all identified capital projects. But now if we look at how much money we have available in the next slide, please. We have around $92.5 million we are expecting to receive. You will see there is one line item left blank, that is senior government conditional grant. That part, some year we get $2 million, some year we get $3 million. This year we already applied for a connecting link grant, which is expected to be over $1 million. So we left that one is grant because blank, because there is no guarantee how much we will get. So with the big picture context from 3 different perspectives, now we will move into the detail of 2023 ask. What are the requests for this year's capital program, and how can we decide which project to fund? So if you see, and the detail of all the projects in the appendix 2 or page 43 of your agenda package. So we have a request for close to $36 million worth of capital project this year. And out of this $36 million, $7 million is already pre-approved carry forward project from last year. And $26 million is new ask for new project, and is around $2.7 million. We haven't determined a timeline yet, so we put it as a future ask. Next slide, please. So clearly, our need exceeds the fund we have available. So how we make decision or how we decide which one to look at. As a simple basis, I looked into what are the big ticket items. And if I move the big ticket item, what the capital ask look like. So I separated 2 projects. One is the Mount Forest Outdoor Pool and Aquatic Center and the Arthur Wastewater Treatment Plant. If I take out these 2 projects, then the ask come down to $8.2 million, from $26 million to $8.2 million. So staff could use some direction on the overall capital project, especially in this in these 2 identified projects. The direction could come in 2 stages. A first stage, go no go decision. Should we build Arthur Wastewater Treatment Plant as previously discussed within this year and within next 3 years, or we take it after 2025? Same comes down to Mount Forest Pool. Do we start building it this year and finish it next year? So there is a go, no go decision. So that's the phase one, stage one of the direction. Stage two of the direction will be the funding limitation. So for example, for the pool, council already approved around $600,000. Should staff move ahead and spend those money and prepare the project? For a wastewater treatment plant, it will cost over $12 million. We might need to look into debt. So should staff start the process of debt issuance? What will be the commitment for 2023? 10% of the project, so those type of direction. The first one is more of a go, no go decision. Second one is if we decide to go ahead, what we are looking at into the funding level for these two projects. Now we will dive into what are the projects in each service area. Starting with recreational services, you will see that the two major projects in recreation. One is the Arthur Radian Community Center renovation, especially the roof replacement and some interior work as well. That will cost us around $1 million. And the second big one is the Mount Forest Pool. Moving to the next one. In terms of environmental services, you will see the major project is the phase 2 of the Arthur wastewater treatment plant. Others are, the second biggest one is some aqua project in both Arthur and Mount Forest. Moving to the next one. In terms of general government, these are some baseline infrastructure and study that needed to be done for the general government services. And these are already pre-approved by council and funded through modernization fund. Moving to the next one. Protection services. The big project here is the SCBA replacement for the fire services. Next slide, please. Moving to the next one, that is the transportation services. Roads has long list of things. Most of them are regular resurfacing, rebuilding, and those. In terms of big project, there's a Domville Street, Conestoga to Andrew Street that was pre-approved and is moving ahead. Next slide, also the part 2 also outlined the other major project under the transportation services. Next slide, please. The last one is the health services. This is a Colubrium installation in the Mount Forest Cemetery. And now putting all these numbers into perspective. In 2020, council approved close to $19 million of capital project. 2021, around 15.1 million. 2022, very similar to 2021, 15.1 million. This year, there is two versions to it. One is if we go ahead with two flagship projects, the pool and the wastewater treatment, that require us to find money for $33 million worth of capital project. Or if the decision comes in, this year we will only fund 10% of those two projects, then the option will change. So that's version 2 is around $15.3 million. So how much money we have to fund these? We have around $17 million available to fund this project. Out of this $17 million, transfer from tax levy and user fees around $3.4 million, grants $400,000. It is expected to be higher with the approval for connecting link and other, but we haven't got the approval yet. Then contributions coming from the development charge. There are gas tax grant, there are OCIF grant, and there are prior year carry forward. So overall, we have around $17 million to fund capital project worth of $33 million or less. Moving to the next slide, it is pretty much a recap of our reserve fund, how much money we have available in various category of reserve fund, whether tax funded or user funded, and how we plan to, if we plan to utilize that, we can definitely do that. So that bring me to the last slide of the presentation. That is, staff is seeking direction, council comfort level on the utilization of reserve fund, choice of capital project and direction, how we should move forward, and what is more acceptable tax levy increase. We have a base case of around 7%, and we have a higher level of service with staff, 3 additional FTE, that's around 10%. So direction on is it 7, 10, or in between or lower on those direction as well. I think that concludes my formal presentation, and open for questions, discussions.
Thanks, Farhad. We'll get a recommendation on the floor here and then open up for discussion. So I have a recommendation here that the Council of the Corporation of the Township of Wellington North receive the 2023 budget presentation. Getting a mover and a seconder for that. Moved by Councillor Rankin, seconded by Councillor Hearn. And with that, I'll open the floor for questions or comments. I've got one ready, so I'll start off. So just if you could clarify for me, Farhad, when we're talking about the infrastructure gap,
Yes.
it's a little bit of a complicated story because we have a replacement of existing infrastructure component of it.
Yes.
And we also have a component of growth related infrastructure.
Yes.
Can you just help clarify, are those things included in some of the presentations you've made? Just help clarify that if you could, please.
Yes, absolutely. So that's a very pertinent questions. When I was going through all the capital justification sheets, and out of the, I think 52 new project proposal, all of them to some extent relate to growth, because we are a small township, and we have grown significantly in last couple of years. Then we draw a line on, okay, if it is related to growth in a lower level, maybe this we can exclude that. If it is a 50% come from growth, so that's how the development charges study. They identify each of the major capital project, what percentage is growth related and what percentage is existing capital related. So we followed that methodology. If you look into the appendix 1 or page 42 of your agenda package, you will see from that development charge study, asset management plan, and other study done at the township, staff identified over 10 major capital projects. Water tower, Arthur Water Tower, Arthur Water Supply, Mount Forest Water Tower. And if you add the requirement for all of these require around $77 million. And in terms of regular maintenance, day-to-day renewal and maintenance project like full road reconstruction, sidewalk pedestrian safety investment, equipment investment, recreation investment, all this that require around $117 million. And that's in total close to $195 million. And what part of it exactly growth related? Some project like Arthur wastewater treatment, that is fully growth related. But full road reconstruction, that is only maybe 10 to 20% is growth related. So those specification come from the way our development charge report identified the project, and the percentage are directly related to the growth.
So just if I could follow up a little bit, so if we go back to, see if I can find it here. The slide that you had with, no, it's the graphic slide with the capital expenditures over years. Yeah, on page, where are we here? 25.
So that is the infrastructure gap asset management plan?
Yes.
Yeah.
So just to make sure I understand this correctly, so in the 2023 line, we're showing a green, which is O&M budget. So that's operations. And what do you mean by O&M budget? Just first of all.
So this plan was prepared in 2021, and they looked into our capital expenditure in 2018, 2019, and 2020. And they looked into what are the needs and how it's going to evolve. The base green, that shows the regular maintenance and all these things. So total need is $16.5 million. And out of that $16.5 million, $5.9 million that are O&M, that is the regular operation and maintenance. O&M stand for operations and maintenance. So that's the base case. These are the existing infrastructure we need to maintain and operate.
Right.
And
but just to be clear, that's not operational cost included in that. That's capital cost.
So operational cost, the way they classified it is on the operating budget, we contribute to capital. So you're exactly right on the mechanics of it. But this is pretty much every year we need to do it to keep it up and running. So that's why they call it operational.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. And then the blue bar includes in the light pale blue section of your graph, also includes new infrastructure that's required to accommodate growth. Is that correct?
Yes. So on the right side, there is average annual expansion and upgrade. So that's around $3.8 million.
Right. And then the yellow bar, tell me more about the yellow bar on 2022's line.
So that includes, because we have some 5 to 8% of our infrastructure in poor condition, and replacement of all those annual renewal need and replacement of those as well.
So part of that being that big of a bar is because we've been lagging behind in infrastructure renewal over time. It's the backlog, if I could put it that way.
Yes, backlog. And that's what when the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing indicator, we are shown at 54%. That means exactly it is that our infrastructure are older than compared to our peers.
Okay, so if I then go forward and I look at the planned capital expenditure for 2023, let's call it the second version without the two major capital projects, that yellow bar, that backlog is still going to carry forward.
It's still going to carry forward if we don't do it.
Right. So that backlog is going to carry forward as long as we continue not to fund the gap.
Yes. For example, our current annual depreciation or amortization is around $5.5 million. But we do tax levy transfer from both user and tax is around $3.5 million. So there is a $2 million gap every year compounding to it.
Well, then we were getting the OSIF and those types of capital grants that help,
So that helped because
Help.
we used to get 1 million, now we get 2 million, so that helped a little bit.
and the gas tax or the community fund or whatever they call it now.
Yes.
So we're getting close to that $6 million just to carry out what we need to, just to carry on day to day. We're not closing that gap. And we're not building the new stuff that we need.
Yes, and also something like out of the, let's say, last 2 years, $15 million approved, we are able to complete only 11.6 million of it. So there is a money issue, capacity issue. So both are constraining us.
And yeah, just within the funding gap, I mean, we know that there's pressure on development charges from a collections perspective. But that is the intention of using those development charges, is to fill that, some of that gap on, particularly on new infrastructure.
Yes.
And so what, I mean, we've got what, $4.5 million in reserves right now for projects, and we're collecting how much a year approximately?
So it varies. Last year we collected close to $1.2 million.
Okay, so
But my anticipation is it will probably slow down a little bit in coming years because of a lot of the exclusion and also probably slow down in construction.
so that's one of the tools we have at our disposal to help bridge some of that, particularly on the new infrastructure piece, but it doesn't come close to fulfilling the height of that blue bar on that graph. Am I fair in characterizing it that way?
I think yes.
Okay, thank you. I'll probably have more later, but thanks for that. I'll let someone else have a crack at you. Any other questions for Farhad at this point?
I didn't have.
I'm available after meeting as well.
I didn't have a question yet. There's just so much more here to think about than when I sat at home and read it. So I'm still thinking at this point in time. Did you have anything, Penny? Hold on.
I was just wondering about the development charges. I'm not clear on that because we're not going to be able to accrue as many as what we would normally be doing. Is that going to alter the graph?
So yes, to the development, our collection of development charge depends on three things, let's say. Number one is the application we get from developer. Developer wants to build in our community. And when they apply, they pay based on a set rate through our development charges bylaws. But with Bill 23, they got a lot of exemptions for all different type of things. So that will reduce our ability to collect revenue. And a lot of the service requirement also got extended. For example, survey, we just when we look into improving a service, it need to be consistent with, let's say, last 5 years service average. Now they increase it to last 10 years. And if we look, so what that does is that lowers the expectation, and that means our rate become lower. But whereas on the construction side of building things, costs are going up. And many of our studies are not even allowed anymore to be funded through development charges. So our ability to really intelligently understand what is the total need, so that is also constrained. So in general, my anticipation is what we had in 2022 in terms of development charge collection, maybe that is one of the highest year for the next couple of years. I don't see that, let's say, collecting $1.2 million in 2023.
So just to put it in context, what we're saying is that it's widening the gap between the costs we have to incur to accommodate growth and the revenue sources we have to fund it.
Yes, I think, yeah, that's a good summary.
It's quite the predicament, isn't it?
So just to build on that a little bit, I think what it means is that we're going to have to look for new ways to fund growth related infrastructure.
Were we not supposed,
I turned it
Thanks.
on, sorry.
were we not supposed to be getting some back from the province that they had said that we wouldn't lose out?
They have indicated that in broad policy terms, but we have no details as to what that's going to look like, whether we qualify, what qualifies. There is way more questions than there are answers related to that.
They're gonna make us quote unquote whole.
Yeah. So we had some of this gap before, it's just made worse. Other questions for Farhad at this point? Well, I got another one I'll throw at you while
Sure.
they're dreaming up some more. So I'd like to talk about the Arthur wastewater treatment plant project. Yeah, as you alluded to, that is very much growth related. It's a very large ticket item that would require probably utilization of reserves, development charges, and probably some long-term debt to be able to do that.
Yes.
Have we, and there are another number of other projects that are very much growth related, water supply, water towers. Have we done a constraint analysis on those things to determine which of these will become a constraint first? And do we have a kind of a layout in terms of timing based on what we expect for growth to be when each of these items becomes the constraint to growth?
Yes, Matt is working on a capacity constraint based number of housing available. So for example, with the existing wastewater treatment capacity, how many more, let's say, single family home permit we can issue? So there is a, Matt can fill me on that, but what I remember top of my head, with the existing capacity, we have close to 200 more home permit capacity. The growth, it come down to the growth expectation. If we expect that we will be growing at 3% for the next 10 years, then this become a very necessary core infrastructure. But if the assumption changed to, okay, we had our highest growth already, now we'll be at 1% level, then probably we have time. Probably with the 200 home, it will take us 3 years to fill that capacity constraint.
Go. I saw your hand there, Matt. Go ahead.
Yep, yeah, and through you, Mayor Lennox, and I'm kind of going a bit off the top of my head too, but in June of 2021, township staff brought forward a report and it looked at kind of the water and wastewater projects for Arthur. And what it predicted was drinking water was going to be an 8 to 10 or 15 year project. Arthur wastewater treatment was going to be a 3 to 5 year project. That was all based on the assumption of the 15% policy for sewage allocation. So township staff are working with a report right now because certainly the biggest constraint is going to be wastewater. Wastewater is at about 200 units for odds not far off, and drinking water is at about 300 units. So those are both going to be big constraints to develop, or possible constraints to development in Arthur going forward.
Okay, and if I could just follow up on that a little bit. You answered my question, but I guess the question I have then is, if we look at you know, we saw a report last week with regard to funding the Mount Forest pool through long-term debt. We have limited long-term debt capacity. Now, as we take on long-term debt in a staged manner, some will get paid down on an annual basis, which opens up capacity again. You know, if we were to take on a project like the Arthur wastewater treatment plant, would that get us, would we be able to stage the debt enough to get us to the next constraining project, I guess? And where is that going to go is what I'm concerned about, and which I understand is a longer term than a annual budget perspective. Go ahead, Matt.
Yep, yeah, and through you, Mayor Lennox, and, you know, kind of spoken out of turn as the operations person, but I think it's a cash flow issue. I think council needs to struggle with this. If council feels that growth is going to happen in Arthur, I think development charges fund 100% of the phase 2 project, but it doesn't fund it probably day one. And the costs don't come 100% day one. But that's probably the consideration that I would suggest council needs to give consideration to, because I think development charges are going to pay for 100% of that project, save and except staff time. But that's my own opinion, and Farhad might, or Brooke might have a different opinion.
Go ahead, Farhad.
So just to put this into the debt context, our debt capacity is around $16 million. And currently we have around $5.5 million existing debt. So that leaves us an unused capacity of around $10 million. And considering the phase 2 of the wastewater treatment plant cost over $12 million, so we'll probably need to fund it through $5 to $7 million of debt, half of that. So that leave us a spare capacity of, let's say, $3 million. And every year we normally free up around $500,000. So that will be on a revolving basis, we will have between $3 to $5 million debt capacity spare. However, being said that $16 million is absolute limit. If we go over that, somebody from province will come and sit with us.
Okay. Thank you for that. That's this is a more complex scenario than just a single year approach. So thanks. Other questions?
I have a question, but I'm not sure it pertains to the budget per se. But I was just wondering, the reserve funds, the assets or projects that are going to be funded by the reserve funds, are they specifically a certain amount for each item in there, or is it just one reserve fund with just a list of names in there to be used for those projects?
If we restrict by reserve fund, means the development charges reserve fund, and those are very specific stipulated. For fire, this is the amount. For admin, this is the amount. For wastewater, this is the amount. So very specific stipulated.
Thank you.
So, and just to add to that, if I can, Councillor Rankin, I mean, we did used to have very specific reserves set for individual projects, you know, within a service area, like a roads project. We had a reserve for item A, item B, item C. We've gone to a consolidated reserve approach. So it's not specific to an individual project. We do have the capacity to create a reserve for an individual project, but we recently went away from the individual project approach because we found there was projects that had been in the works for a long period of time and had not been acted on. And that money then was kind of inaccessible in a sense.
Right. Oh, I see. Okay.
So we went to a more consolidated, so it's consolidated by basic functional area, recreation, roads, fire, etc.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Penny.
Thank you. May I just ask one more question? On the funding for the pool, there were three options for the taxpayers' input into it. And I'm just wondering if there's any feasible way of using option number 3, which would be the least amount the taxpayer would have to pay. That would free up a bit of money. And we could worry about how we're going to pay for the rest of the pool. Would that be a feasible option?
And I don't want to put the words in staff's mouth, but I think that was the intent, is to have a discussion around what the appropriate level of funding would be for that. Certainly, I think all those options are on the table. I do think, though, that doing it through a special levy, as was suggested, will meet with some significant resistance from the public. Go ahead.
I was just thinking with the higher amount, if option number 1 were on the table and the higher amount that the residents would be paying, you have some residents that won't be using the pool at all, and they may object to that, and others that will be using the pool may object just because, number 1, they've said, I've already paid for the pool through my taxes. I'm not willing to either donate more or donate time to fundraise for it.
I think that's very much a risk that we all recognize with this project. It's one of the things that makes this extra challenging.
Okay.
Other questions or comments? Okay, I'll dive in with another one for HUD. And I just want, again, I'm asking for clarification. So, and I forget the numbers, but in the version 2 of the capital spending plan, I think there was and I forget the numbers of, pardon me, but anyways, let me get to where I was going with this, and then the numbers become less, the individual numbers become less important. Then you presented a slide of information of available funding sources. And it appeared to me, and maybe I'm reading it wrong, that the available funding sources was in excess of what was in that version 2 capital budget. So just if you could unpack that a little bit for me, please.
So you are exactly right. And Brooke and I talked about it. So there is a $2 million gap. So $15 million and some change of version 2 of the capital project, and funding available around $17 million. It is because I think 2 weeks ago, we got our Mount Forest standpipe tender, and cost came in beyond our expectation. And this year being that volatile year, last year we had a inflation of 15.6 on construction material and all these things. So the number we have here, we don't know whether how much more we will need. So we kept a little bit of cushion of around $2 million as a contingency fund.
Thanks for that clarification. So I guess that brings me to my next question. So if there were cost overruns on an individual project due to inflation that we talked about before, it would come out of that contingency fund as opposed to out of reserves funds.
So there's a direct answer to it, because because those funds, that additional $2 million are sitting on reserve fund, So ultimately it will come out of the reserve fund. For example, the Connecting Link project, we are expecting to get over $1 million grant revenue, and that is kind of fixed. They don't increase the grant once it is approved. And let's say project cost $1.5 million. By the time we finished in 2024, it came at $1.6 million. So additional $100,000 we have to come up with as a township. So those are the, and we will utilize council directed reserve to like the transportation reserve to fund those. So yes, ultimately it will come out of the reserve.
Okay, and still I've got another follow-up to that. So then what would be the end result on our, let's say we had to use those contingency dollars. well, either way, let's say we had to use all those contingency dollars just for clarity sake. Would it have an impact on our reserve balances at the end of the period? So if we take a snapshot today of what our reserve balances are, we end up having to use that contingency fund. Does that mean our reserve balances are going to be $2 million less at the end?
So before I answer that, I just want to share one context. So I was reading through last year's budget deliberation and all this, and staff initially proposed $3.5 million of contribution to capital, a close to 20% an increase. And that idea came from because of the similar scenario, because in 2020 council approved close to $19 million of capital project, and there is infrastructure gap and there is a cost overrun. So how you do actually end up minimizing it, because there is only certain amount of reserve fund. So yes, this has impact on reserve fund, and if we see another 15.6% construction inflation, then probably on tax levy as well.
Thank you. Other questions? Okay, you're back to me, Farhad. Sorry about that.
Not a problem.
When I look at the list of the 10-year capital items, I know where those came from. I know they're not pulled out of a hat. But 10-year budgeting for us is pretty new. I just wonder where we are in terms of looking for opportunities to scanning our complete resources to see whether there's ways to defer some of those capital projects. Let me give you an example of what I mean. And this is something that just came to me anecdotally at one point, and it had to do with the need for a operations center in Mount Forest and a need for a new fire hall. Currently, those two facilities exist on one property. Would the one project moving forward free up more capacity for the other one to be delayed, I guess is, and have we gone down that road in terms of looking at ways to defer those capital items?
At a staff level, we had a preliminary discussion on this, and our discussion came down to one point: is what level of growth we are expecting. Because last 2 years, the pace of growth we experienced, if we extrapolate those, then definitely there is a strong need for the fire hall in Mount Forest, because we are already at capacity pretty much. Same goes for operation center. I think Matt can add more detail on the operation center side.
And before we go to Matt, I just wanted to indicate what I was getting at specifically is, if the fire hall were to be vacated from where it is today for fire hall purposes, could it be repurposed to provide works yard capacity to delay the construction of an operations center? And have we looked at those types of options?
Not that if council direct staff can definitely look into all those permutation combination. We haven't looked into the reuse part of it.
Okay. Matt, go ahead.
Yeah, through you, Mayor Lennox, though some of those conversations have been had, they're just not quantified, maybe is what I would say. So
yeah, no, and that's fair. I'm not expecting it to be an answer today. I just think that that's one of the avenues that we can look at going forward to help close the gap that we were talking about, is if we can delay some of those capital projects by finding other ways to fulfill the need, that helps us manage the financial burden. Brooke, go ahead.
Through you, Mayor Lennox. I would expect that some of those conversations could be a piece of the growth management strategy that we're looking at doing later this year as well, because as we define those various needs and we get a better handle on the facilities that we currently have and we want to look at, that would be the type of staging in terms of infrastructure development that would then match up with what Farhad was talking about in terms of growth expectations.
And that would then be paired with assumptions around growth and then as the assumptions need to change over time, we would have to go back and revisit the staging of some of those things. Okay. Thank you for that. Councillor Rankin.
Through you, Mayor Lennox. I don't know, in Damascus, I believe it was the municipal office before this one became it. And I'm just not sure about the capacity of that building. Is there anything that building could be used for to try and defer some of these projects?
I don't see, Brooke, you want to tackle that one?
Through you, Mayor Lennox, I think that's part of the same conversation. It's understanding all the existing facilities that we have and some of the opportunities related to them. And then again, where we want to head and can we use some of those existing facilities or do we need to look at other options? So it's a good point, and I think it ties in nicely with what we were just discussing.
And on a similar but different line too, we may need to look at what facilities we have that may be underutilized and find a new home for them, so we're not having to continue to pay the cost to maintain them. Okay, anybody have other questions, comments at this point? So I know you're looking for staff or council direction on this, Farhad, so I'm gonna try to give my perspective and maybe it'll stir some discussion from my colleagues. I think in general terms, I think you and the staff team have done a great job of capturing the pressures around our current economic situation and relating them to what we need to ask our residents to contribute towards those things. I think you're on the path that I'm fairly comfortable with in terms of trying to address our capital needs. I do think though that sometimes you've done a great job of pointing us into a comparison of where we were before and comparing it to the current or future situation. Unfortunately, our lives are a little bit more dynamic than that. And we have to find ways to, we've talked about some new staff positions. Sometimes we have to invest in staff resources to get a payoff that may come later. And so it's just use that as an add-on may not be the best way to look at it as opposed to an investment that needs to be made for a future gain. And so it gets more complicated than just the way it was presented here, I think. And I know that's hard for finance staff to get their heads around too, because there's a lot of unknowns in that. So I guess I would like to see us, I'm largely in favor of what's been presented. I do think though that we need to find some way to include some or all of those staff positions without going to the full additional cost that was suggested in the presentation, like the 10-point-something%. I think maybe we need to be able to make some adjustments in our terms of our contributions to capital or reserves to mitigate the impact of that, knowing that, or at least my expectation is this is an investment for future gains. So to just pass on the full cost, I think would be inappropriate at the present time. But I think there's some pretty important capital projects in there. We certainly need to continue with our operational services. I do hear positive comments about our level of service from time to time, and those are nice to hear. And I think we need to keep up the good work on that. So thanks for the presentation. I think, in terms of revision for the next stage, I'd like to see some of those staff things incorporated into the budget and maybe some options about how we can balance the amount that we have to ask our residents for against that investment in human resources. And I'll look to my colleagues now for any comments from them. Because eventually we got to come to a consensus, so we got to figure out how we get there.
Yeah, I do agree that it seemed a little odd with it separated out, and it would make a lot more sense as being part of the whole solution. And I do think we need to get that number down somehow. This is, I think, the worst, most complicated budget. I don't know. I'm just vocalizing here that I've ever seen, and I don't know what, I mean, whether you've seen that, Mary Andy, but this is a very difficult situation, I think.
If I could build on that a little bit, Councillor Hearn, I think the information we got with regard to our asset management plan really, while we knew there was an issue with underfunding of capital, we didn't understand the extent of it. And to be honest, we haven't even included all of our assets yet. We haven't included buildings. This was just core infrastructure like the roads, water, wastewater. None of the buildings are included yet, so that gap is going to get bigger, not smaller, as we get more information. But it does give us a quantity, which is a little frightening.
Yeah, but at least we're acquiring the information now. It's
Right.
just we didn't know before.
So, and with adding the growth to the picture, then the pace of growth is accelerated. It makes it more complex. I mean, I'm sure everybody's tired of hearing me talking about the family that's suddenly going to have triplets. But that's the reality we're facing here, is that what we'd planned for before isn't the reality we have today. And it's going to require us to adjust and adapt and find new ways to finance things that we didn't necessarily consider before. Go ahead.
The only other comment I would like to add is about the pool. I'd like to have some more discussions with the committees and to bring back maybe more possibilities of ways to be able to fund that and not be such a burden to the taxpayers.
Okay. I do think there's a need for us to get to some resolution on that too, for the volunteers who've been working towards this project as well. Anything come out of the discussion for you, Farhad, today during the process?
I can summarize what I understood is staff will go back and include the proposed 3 FTE into the base budget and reconsider some of the contribution to capital and reserve and come up with a new revised, like currently we have 7 and 10. So probably a new revised one single number for council's consideration.
Brooke?
Through you, Mayor Lennox, I just want to clarify that. Do we want one single number, or do we want, again, a range of options for consideration?
Well, I'll speak from my perspective, in that I think that when we get, so the 10%, and I did the calculation here, ends up with an 8 and change percent. Like if we look at the maximum one, it ends up with, after you take off growth, it ends up with about an 8% impact.
Yes.
8.36 was my math, but I may have the numbers wrong. And I think that's more than our residents, some of our residents can withstand, given the current climate. We've seen inflation at 6.8, I believe is the number you shared with us. Lots of people are feeling a lot of pain with just that on, the inflation, and now we're asking them to pay the more because our costs have gone up. So something between, I think I could live with asking for inflation or something slightly above inflation of the taxpayer, but I don't think I'm ready to go to 8.36. And I recognize fully it's still not helping us close the gap. But I think there's a lot more work to do to try to figure out how all the options we have on the table to help us close the gap. It's great to know what the gap is. Yeah, there's more work to be done, and I would do also want to thank you very much, Farhad, and the other members of the team. Now more than ever, we need to look long-term budgeting because of all the changes that are being thrust upon us, and as we get more information, it becomes the decisions we make today have implications next year, the year after, and for many years to come. I don't know if you two would like to weigh in on where you think taxation, what's tolerable for our residents. I think that would be helpful to staff as well.
Do you want to go ahead? Certainly 8 point anything, I don't think is. We just can't do that. I kind of wanted to get back. I got lost in your answer, Mayor Lennox. What was your question again, Brooke?
Through Mayor Lennox to you, Councillor Hearn. It was, would council prefer a few options to work towards in the next report that comes back, or one sort of definitive tax increase levy? Which is more helpful?
I think seeing as we are not a full complement of council right now, I would prefer the more options rather than one definitive, and then give councillors Burke and McCabe a chance to weigh in on them as well.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think a couple of options, but getting back to the tax question, which is where he led us off to. Yeah, the 8 point whatever, I'm just going to blank out at 8% is like, I personally can't even afford that. So I don't think I can wish that upon anyone. Things are just too hard and too uncertain on so many different levels right now. I am more comfortable, and I don't even like inflation for goodness sakes right now, but I'm much more comfortable staying closer to that if we can somehow manage a couple of options. And
I have to agree that I don't think the 8% would be tolerable for the rest of the residents, and keep it as low as possible, and look at every other option that we have to us to see if we can fill in the gap somewhere.
Yeah, it's kind of, yeah, I agree with your long-term planning, because that's where some of this comes in, I think, Mayor Lennox, and that maybe there is, and it's hard to speak to next year, but maybe there is some way to smooth the wave a little bit. And, you know, we're seeing that you said in your presentation, Farhad, that inflation is expected to stabilize and interest rates kind of within the next 12 months. Or at least hope. You said expected a few times in your presentation, which I expected connecting link funding. I like the optimism, you know, but getting back to how maybe there's some way that we can try to level it off and smooth it out a little bit, get less impactful.
Go ahead, Penny.
Thank you, Mayor Lennox. I was just wondering, even though we are not allowed to have a lot of the development charges that we should have been having, say, with the expected growth, would it balance out in the amount of money we have coming in through development charges?
Do you want to tackle that one, Farhad?
I can try it definitely, Mayor Lennox. Through you, Mayor Lennox, to Councillor Rankin. Our funding model in the past explicitly tried to do the philosophy of growth funding the growth. Even on that time, growth really didn't fund 100% of the growth, probably 80% of it. And now, as a policy, as a principle, we are in the opposite direction. That's existing taxpayer also need to bear some burden of the growth. So that is the kind of the direction. So what that means is, if when we are all through into growth funding growth, and that time it is 80%, so now it will be less than that. as well. So no development charge will not 100% fund, and maybe in the time horizon is also an issue because, for example, Arthur wastewater treatment plant, it need to be built in the next 3 years if we expect the same level of growth. But to get the development charge recaptured, it might take us 10 years.
And just to add an example of how complicated this gets, I like to use the example of Preston Street in Arthur, which is near Cache development, large residential development. We relatively recently paved that street without urbanization, so without curb and gutter. And so, while Cache has been asked to make a major contribution to that upgrade of that street, there's still costs that are shared by the township for some of those services that we wouldn't have contemplated if that growth weren't happening, and development charges and developer contributions to date have not covered either. So yes, the street will be an improved streetscape at some taxpayers' expense. That's just one example of how difficult this gets. And I think we're going to get to a point where we're going to have to ask developers to contribute to more things than we did in the past in order to be able to finance this. I know that I've had conversations with one developer who is also concerned about sewage treatment capacity. And they said they offered basically that they would be willing to contribute towards, for instance, infiltration and inflow study into our sewage treatment, into our sewage collection system to try to extend the amount of capacity we have. Because they see this problem not only here, but elsewhere as well in their dealings. So I think we're going to have to be more creative with some of those types of things as well for the future. Any other questions, Lisa?
Sorry. Looking forward, like you're looking towards budget approval for the March 20th. And I will have more questions and comments. So I'm just kind of wondering how late I can throw those out, like how much, like within a week or something, if we have questions to get back to you, or
Clarification questions welcome anytime, anytime, and decision.
throw them at you a couple days before is what I'm saying.
I'm fairly comfortable. That's why I think I took the time to build it. So clarification questions, as soon as comes to your mind, you can shoot me an email. I can go from there. Decisions and choice centric questions, the earlier the better, because that way we can structure things that way.
Along that line, and considering a couple of our colleagues aren't able to be with us today, would it be acceptable to include something in our next council agenda for an opportunity for some questions and discussions related to the budget, so that more people have an opportunity to, and if you think of things in the interim, it'll be an opportunity for some discussion. I don't know exactly how you'd structure that, but a report that gives us an opportunity to have some further budget discussion during our regular council meeting would be my suggestion. Brooke?
Through you, Mayor Lennox, I will chat with our clerk, Karen Wallace, and we will look at some options for the March 6th council meeting next week to have some further discussion.
Thanks. Well, ask them probably to send their question in for the next time around for discussion. Okay.
Charlie, I see that your hand is raised. I know you have a question. We're wondering if you can submit it and it'll be reviewed for the March 6th meeting. If you can get it to me today or even tomorrow by lunch, that would be great. The procedure bylaw just doesn't provide for attendees and members of the public to participate in the meetings. Thanks.
And just to add to that, that we will be having some sort of public engagement prior to finally passing the budget as well. So stay tuned. Any other questions or comments at this point from council? Anything else from staff in terms of process? Okay, so then I guess we'll just proceed with calling the motion on the recommendation here. All those in favor? Thank you. And we'll move on to our confirming bylaw. And the recommendation is that bylaw number 17-23 being a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of the Council of the Corporation of the Township of Wellington North at a special meeting held on February 27th, 2023, be read a first, second, and third time and enacted. A mover and a seconder for that, please. Moved by Councillor Hearn, seconded by Councillor Rankin. All those in favor? That's carried. Thank you. And on to adjournment. Excuse me. And the recommendation is the special council meeting of February 27th, 2023 be adjourned at 3:35 p.m. Moved by Councillor Rankin, seconded by Councillor Hearn. All those in favor? That's carried. Thanks very much, everyone.